Hello friends, my name is TheRealEmile and welcome back to some more Forza Motorsport 6. Now today we're going to be speaking about the Chevrolet Corvette C7. Now this is a car that's supposed to compete with the European Porsches and Ferraris. And for years it hasn't really been able to do that. Automotive journalists have been telling us, sure, the Corvette can really compete with the Europeans, but it never really has been able to. However, with the C7, they really are starting to get good at this, and the C7 is at the point where this really could compete with a Porsche 911. Stat-wise, it has 650 horsepower, 615 pounds-feet of torque, and it weighs 3,536 pounds. It is an S-Class car and sits at 719 PI, which is fairly respectable and is actually more than most supercars. So, I decided to take the C7 to the track to see how well it handles, and well, I was blown away by this car. I really was blown away by how good the Z06 is to drive. The rear end will not come out on this car. It is super planted. You have the speed down the straight. Sure, it's not quite as much as you'd probably get from, say, a supercar. This does have a lot of aero bits on it, obviously to make it handle better through the corners. So it might suffer a bit when it comes to straight line. However, the handling is just so incredible on this Corvette. I really wasn't expecting that from the C7. I wasn't. I drove the standard car in Forza 5 and I wasn't particularly happy with it. Well, as this car really is very, very good. Anyway, I decided to compare it to a bunch of different cars from different countries. Hence, Corvette C7 Z06 versus the world. We start with the Germans, and this is a Mercedes-AMG GTS, 503 horsepower, 3,573 pounds of weight. I'm not a huge fan of the GTS, I've got to be honest. It's a little bit boring, I've got to say. It doesn't quite have the same passion that other AMG Mercs have, in my opinion. However, it is a car meant to compete with the Porsche 911s and BMW M6s and so on. So I figured I would give it a go. PI wise, this is the underdog. This has the lowest PI of any car here today, 657, and it is an A-class vehicle. 503 horsepower is also the lowest amount of horsepower here today. However, I did want to throw this car around just because I wanted to see what sort of lap times it set. From what I remember in the actual Top Gear show, this set a very, very fast lap time, from what I remember. So I kind of wanted to see what sort of lap time it could set here in Forza 6. To drive, the AMG is a lot more controlled than the SLS was. However, it's still a bit slidey, I've got to admit. And I wasn't a particularly fan of it. Next up though, we have the SLS AMG. This is the car the GTS replaced. 571 horsepower, 3,571 pounds of weight. Me personally, I prefer the SLS because this thing is just absolutely bonkers. However, I did want to see how it would compete against the GTS. Now, obviously, the GTS has a lot less power. However, it does handle quite a bit better. The SLS is a very slidey car. This, at least in my mind, is how you'd sort of expect a Corvette to drive. This is how you'd expect that C7 Z06 to actually go around corners, sideways with smoke pouring off the tyres. The SLS, it is a hoot, don't get me wrong, but this is not a race car at all. I wasn't really throwing this around as sort of a competitor to the Z06 so much as I was sort of throwing it around to see how sort of the lap times would be between this and the GTS. I actually wanted to see which one would be quicker. PI wise, the SLS is better than the GTS. It has actually got 30 more PI than the GT. However, again, it's more slidey, so I was definitely interested between these two. These two are sort of having their own little battle, but again, I still wanted to see how they would compete against the Z06 as well. Next up, from Italy, we have the Ferrari F12 Berlinetta, 730 horsepower. That was strangely hard to get off my tongue. 3,593 pounds. The F12 Berlinetta is the second highest PI car we have here today. It actually has one more PI over the Z06 C7. It's also by far the most powerful vehicle here today. 730 horsepower is an awful lot. Yeah, when you hear 730 horsepower and the fact this thing is rear wheel drive, you expect it to be horrendous to drive. And sure, compared to the Z06, it wasn't quite as good. You see me go wide for a lot of these corners. This car does have a bit of understeer, however it doesn't really have much in the way of oversteer. The rear end doesn't really come out on this car. Sure, you can make it if you're a complete and utter moron, but the F12 actually does handle relatively decently, which is something you wouldn't really expect from this car. The car, Jeremy Clarkson said, had too much power. Yet it's easier to drive than some of the supercars I've driven. Hell, even some of Ferrari's own supercars, this is slightly better to drive. There's a lot of smoke in that second to last corner, however, don't worry about it. It didn't really feel like it was doing that in-game. I assume it's just sort of exaggerated a little bit. Next up we have the Japanese, and we start with the Lexus LFA. Yes, you could technically say it's American. I class it as Japanese personally because it really is kind of a Toyota. 552 horsepower, 3,263 pounds. This is the lightest car we have here today. Now, the LFA in Forza 5 wasn't a particularly nice car to drive. It felt very heavy. It felt a lot like a Gran Tourer. In Forza 6, I'm pleased to say this does actually feel much more like a track car. It really does. Through the corners, it's relatively planted. The rear end can come out on this. It isn't too hard to do. The engine, the V10 in this, is fantastic. It's high revving. It can get to the red line in a very, very short amount of time. However, the issue with that, of course, is because it's such a reactive engine. If you put the power down way too early or put it on sort of all at once, the rear end will come out. So you do have to be careful on the throttle in the LFA. However, it is much improved over the Forza 5 version, and yeah, it'll be interesting to see what sort of lap time this has set compared to the Corvette. The LFA is down on PI compared to the Corvette 687, which actually puts it only 1 PI over the SLS, so maybe they'll have their own little battle as well. Next up we have a Nissan GTR, 542 horsepower, 3,887 pounds. That's a lot of weight. In fact, this is the heaviest car we have here today. However, it's also one of the highest PIs. This is actually just into S-Class 702 PI. So I was kind of interested to see how the GTR would perform. Now, in Forza 5, this thing was kind of understeery. It didn't set the best lap time. It was kind of similar to the other four-wheel drive supercar we had, which was the Audi R8 V10. The GTR in this game, unlike the LFA, isn't improved. If anything, this actually has more understeer than it did in Forza 5. However, I'm not quite sure how, but this is quicker than it was in Forza 5. A lot quicker. And I don't mean in a straight line quicker, I mean over the course of a lap, this thing was genuinely quicker than the old version. Obviously, we'll reveal the lap times towards the end. What I can say is the GTR did go much faster than it did in Forza 5. And I guess that's sort of more what the GTR should be doing. This car is renowned for being a track monster, per se. And yeah, the GTR, I don't particularly like driving this car. It has way too much understeer. It does handle a lot like the Infiniti Q50L Rouge. But the GTR is cheap, and it was alright, I guess. It set a very good lap time. Next up, we have a Chevrolet Corvette ZR1. This is the C6 model. 638 horsepower, 3,350 pounds of weight. I love this thing. For those of you who have watched Forza Top Gear laps in previous seasons, you will know I very much like this car. And it was actually this series that got me into this car. The C6 is just mental, and it doesn't actually drive quite as bad as you'd expect it to. And even here in Forza 6, the car is pretty decent. I think it may have a bit more tail happiness than it did in Forza 5, or at least that's what it feels like to me. However, the Z06, yeah, it's still a joy to drive this car. It really is surprising. And as I tell everyone every time I use this car, go and try this car out, because it is very good. It's actually very cheap as well, 110,000 credits. Which I believe is about the same as the Z06. So between this and the Z06, what would I pick? I'd probably go with the Z06. It is a nice handling car, I've got to be honest. However, the C6 is a lark to drive. It is very much good fun, and yeah, I do recommend that car. Next up, we have, I guess, the C7's biggest rival. This is the Dodge Viper GTS, 640 horsepower, 3,296 pounds. This is actually the second lightest car here today, which is quite amazing. Now, the Viper GTS in Forza 5 set an exceptionally fast lap time. This thing competed with Ferraris and stuff, so I was kind of interested to see what the Viper would do in this game. And, well, it handles pretty superb. I really like the way the Viper drives. You wouldn't expect sort of Corvettes and Vipers to drive really nicely, but they do. They really do. And the Viper, you know, between this and the Z06, I'd choose the Viper. Honestly, the Viper, the new Viper, is one of my favourite cars in the world. I really adore this thing. I think it's just the most fantastic thing ever. I really like the way it looks. I like the way it drives. I like the fact that it's got a manual transmission instead of the Z06 flappy paddle. And yeah, this car maybe drives, I don't know, 2-3% worse than the Z06. I guess it could go sideways a little bit more than it, and that manual transmission isn't quite as fast as the flappy paddle. However, between this and the Z06, there really isn't much between them, so it'll be interesting to see how those two compete. And finally, I figured I would throw this around because this is kind of a legend on this series. Anyway, this is the Dodge ViperACR, 600 horsepower, 3,408 pounds of weight. This is a lot higher PI than pretty much everything else here today. This is actually S731, which is about 21 more than the Corvette. And in fact, yeah, it's 21 more than the F12 as well. So yeah, the ACR is a legend around here, and it's because this is a superb handling car. And it really is still here in Forza 6. You can take so much speed through the corners. I mean, look at that through Hammerhead. Look how much speed I can take in this ACR Viper, and it will not go sideways. This is such a joy to drive just because it's so mental. The brakes are also fantastic. Not quite as good as they were in Forza 5, I do have to admit. However, the brakes are fantastic on the ACR Viper as well. This really is a joyous car. If you have 110,000 credits to spend on a supercar and you're wondering what to get the Viper ACR. This is literally one of the best value for money cars in this game. It is so quick. Anyway, on to the times, and the Viper ACR takes first place off the BAC Mono with a 1:14.636. That's going to take some beating, that. That really is a very quick lap time. The C7 Z06 was barely defeated. A 1:16.009 puts it into 5th place, and it was actually faster than most of the things that went round today. The F12 Berlinetta goes into 6th with a 1:16.504, with the Viper trailing behind fractionally with a 1:16.541. The GTR was much faster than it was in Forza 5 with a 1:17.343, being almost the second quicker than what it was in Forza 5. The Corvette C6 ZR1 gets a 1:17.388, and the Lexus LFA gets a 1:17.414, so pretty decent lap times across the board for them. And as we look lower down the board, we find the Mercedes SLS with a 1:18.408, and the AMG GTS lost to the SLS with a 1:18.748. It actually loses to a Shelby GT350R as well, the AMG GTS. Yeah, so there you go, friends. That is it. The Corvette C7 Z06, sorry, is a fantastic car. I do recommend you give that a go. However, if you're picking a 110,000 credit supercar, ACR Viper is the way to go. Anyway, I want to thank you all very much for watching. My name's been TheRealEmile. Until next time, farewell.